Doesn't matter.
So, are you shooting right now?
Yeah.
Thanks, you just ruined the whole thing.
All right, let's start over.
One of the things I was, thinking through is just how many times we get questioned from customers on different things. And one of those questions that always seems to come up is the question of bid spec. And I was curious, how you guys answer that kind of a question. Something that I regularly am challenged with, trying to understand, or trying to really put to words why to customers. Because obviously, it seems like we're the guys providing the service, and so it's really easy for us to be like, well, yeah, we don't want to do bids. Why do we not want to do bids? So what's your thoughts? How do you guys kind of position that and word that?
Well, it's funny. I mean, here we are where we have our Christmas party, and it was maybe a year ago that we were actually in a situation where someone asked us to be on a bid. Mm-hmm. And I'm here talking on the phone, hating myself for even entertaining it. But I told the customer, I said, we don't do bids. Why? Because it's an exercise in futility. It's basically who can make the fewest dollars.
Yeah.
And then there's really no concept of relationship. And I a lot of times use the kind of picture of, there's fist over palm, which is kind of like, I want you to all bid it. I'm going to go with the lowest person. I might even beat them up a little bit more. And then there's the idea of relationship, kind of that concept of technology partner that we talk about, kind of interlaced fingers. And I say that's what we're about. And I told this person around Christmas, I said, we're going to be higher. We're going to be maybe 10-15% higher because we can't be at near zero. And I said, as long as you're prepared for that we're not going to come and try to be the lowest, then we can work together. So funny enough, we ended up going up against the largest AV integrator in the country, and they chose us.
Nice.
And the reason that they chose us when talking to the consultant was, we really believe Profound has our best interest in mind. And I really think that it was a matter of kind of painting the picture and telling them that it's more than just the bottom line. So the reason we don't do it is because it just doesn't make sense, because it doesn't value the relationship, and that's really what we're about.
Yeah, it's a huge part. I mean, I think it's even more than just the relationship. It's one facet of it, right? But at the end of the day, the customer is the one who gets shortchanged. Because if you came to me and you said, hey, here's a $100,000 bid, all you got to do is beat it. I can beat that all day long. It's no problem. I'll come in at 98,000. But how do people beat it? They typically beat it because they cut things out. They usually are taking a critical aspect of the job out to make sure that they're the cheapest guy. Something that the customer may not even understand is necessary and needed. And one of the things I value heavily about what we do is that we're looking for the long term, like you mentioned, the relationship aspect, looking for the idea of how do we make sure that this job is not just successful the day we put it in, but it's successful years after we put it in. And part of that is, as we all know, like I always use the term of saying, it's not if it's going to fail, it's when it's going to fail, right? Technology does fail. It's stupid for us to pretend that it doesn't. Nobody, and so if we acknowledge the fact that the technology is going to fail, then I think what's important for us from an engineering perspective, and it's really the hard part, is engineering a solution that has the ability to be kept as reliable as possible, but also has the ability to be able to be fixed easily when it does go down. Mm-hmm. And those are the little pieces. Those are the pieces that probably increase the project price by 10 or 15%. But it saves you significantly on the back end when you factor in service visits that don't need to be done because we can do it all remotely. Or the fact that the system doesn't go down because we put a commercial display in instead of that residential display that somebody bought at Costco. So those factors are always not going to be considered when we're talking about bid specs. The guy who's making the decision at the top doesn't look at it and say, why is this company more qualified? He is literally looking at the number.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is that a lot of times this bid spec, specification comes down like it's coming down from a mountaintop, and everyone has to, try to design, not even design to it, just quote to it, and they're flawed.
Very flawed. The consultant side is very frustrating at times.
And then, you try to tell, in this bid environment, you try to tell the customer this, which they're interested to hear, but then the consultant's like, just bid it as it is. We'll figure it out later.
I can't say how many times I've heard that.
So then that's like, okay, if we were to do that, we have no way of making sure that it's right. So then you select us and we're doomed to begin with, so that's another reason why.
Yeah, when we do, the times that I think we've been involved in bids have been because we have a customer that we have a relationship with, that we've been working with for a while, but are required to send something to bid. And it's frustrating in those situations because we'll get this bid spec that's been designed by a consultant, and our team looks at it and they says, this can't work. This is impossible. It will not function.
Right.
And so we go back to the customer and we tell them that, and unfortunately we've got to stick to this bid spec so that we can be one of the many that are throwing a number towards it.
I think that's an important one.
Yeah, bids tend to create a cash flow oriented business model where businesses that participate in bids, because they have to bid it down, get the price down to win the project, they don't have much cash. And so at the end of the day, when they're not making enough in margin, then their cash flows are tight. And if their cash flows are tight, they have to chase the next bid.
Yeah.
And if they're chasing the next bid, and that's happening over and over and over again, it just means that their wallet is tighter for hiring talent. So when you have tighter talent pools, tighter budget for talent pools, you end up in a position where you're sending people off to site that have low knowledge of what they're doing, and you're trying to get them to, complete the project, but they're constantly calling back to the office looking for support, and you're constantly having to overstaff in order to compensate for that kind of thing, and it becomes a bad circle.
Yeah. I think the other thing too worth mentioning with bids is sometimes, and that you touched on this, sometimes the customer just has a procedural thing where they just need 3 prices, and they can in fact choose the one that is the highest value.
Yeah.
And so we're here for that. We don't mind. There's no shame in what we do. It's not like we're trying to conceal our secret recipe. We can provide a proposal, but we just won't want to avoid this idea of let us try to be the lowest cost, or let us try to take someone else's design and be the lowest cost. It just doesn't make sense to us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we forget about the idea of how it impacts us as a company as well, which is important. Number one is that we're in business for the purpose of being able to service our customers to the long term. And it just takes away from this idea of partnership, right? Something that we have really focused on is making sure that we're a good partner. We can't be a good partner if we can't be around. We can't be a good partner if we can't keep talented staff employed. And that's a really important factor. And there's a lot of people that can do audio video. I always joke and say that many people that work for our competition got into the industry simply because they used to be a car audio guy, and they were like, I know how to hook up speakers. I can do that at a commercial job, And the problem with that scenario is that they don't have the technical knowledge. It takes effort to hire people who are really technically knowledgeable and understand what they're doing, and to keep them, and that's really tough to do. So we're in business of making sure that we can employ great employees to support their families so that we can be there for our customers, and create simple solutions for our customers.
Yeah, I mean, the other issue is that companies that participate in bids on a regular basis and aren't making enough profit on them have to chase more and more bid opportunities to make up for that, which means that they have to staff for that large volume of bid projects.
At low margin.
At low margin, yes. So they're consuming a large amount of people from the talent pool, if you want to call it that, and then they're sending them on site, and they're trying to manage numerous projects all at the same time. And we hear from our customers a lot that, either people don't show up on time, or the people that showed up to the beginning of the job don't actually know what they're doing, and they're there to babysit the project until the actual talent shows up.
Yep.
And then that just opens up, once the project's completed, your day 2 problems.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is how do you support a project that doesn't have any money in it on day 2?
Yeah.
When something goes wrong and the customer needs support, if the original company didn't make any money, their motivation for coming back out to fix things it's gone.
I hear that all the time. And it's frustrating for us. It's a ripoff for us, because when we get called in to try to fix their problem, there's no money left for us at that point. And then we're trying to come in and save the day, and we don't even have enough margin to be able to fix it. So that's really challenging for sure.
I will say though, it's gotten us some good customers, because we've also had where we get brought in and then we save the day. I'm thinking of one of our customers in New York City, and they use probably the second largest systems integrator in the country, and that went through the bid process and made a mess of it, and then we ended up coming in and fixing scores of rooms that weren't wired properly, that weren't finished, because the original guy's gone, and the customer just got tired of calling the third project manager
Yeah.
saying, please come finish it. And so it has helped us to
Absolutely.
educate our customers and to get them not to want to do that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell a firsthand story as well. We have a customer who you can guess, but gentleman Kevin and I were just talking about this morning is number 2 on the Forbes list. And we do some work with their businesses, and this gentleman, they were going through a bid spec opportunity, and they used the largest company in the country that does AV. We all know who that is. And they just got terrible service because it's the same thing. They were required in the initial part of their phases to go out to bid. And they went to bid. They got this company to come in and install probably 40 or 50 rooms in their building, and they never get the company out to service the system, right? And they won't respond. And so the company loses the bid, loses the job at the end after they've already kind of installed everything. We came in, saved the day, and we've been out there for a number of years now as their partner, taking over everything piece by piece.
And it's because of that cash flow business model.
Yep.
That they're not worried about the customer, they're worried about the cash to pay the bills this week.
Yep.
And the customer is the second thought there.
So is it cheaper for someone to go with a bid ultimately, or is it cheaper for them to spend a few more dollars?
I mean, up front, it's going to be cheaper to go with the bid, and then you're going to spend the more dollars on the back end.
Yep.
You're going to spend the dollars fixing it. You're going to spend the dollars realizing that the design wasn't right, or you're going to spend the dollars because the competency isn't there.
Yep.
And same thing with day 2.
Or you may not ever have a system that works well because it was designed budget, it's designed with the budget in mind. And so it just never functions appropriately. So then you're putting up with it for 4 or 5 years before you finally say, I'm tired of it, I want to replace it. Right?
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I think the cost of something is what it costs you up front, and then what it costs you throughout the lifetime. And so when you measure that cost, people would have been better off just doing it kind of right the first time.
Absolutely.
And the other aspect is deadlines. When you're in a bid scenario, you're just another person that looked for the best price. So the motivation for a company to meet your deadline is kind of lowered at that point.
Yeah.
They're not getting the amount of money that they need to make from this project, and so their motivation to keep you as happy as can be is lower.
Yep.
And so when your deadline comes up and that's in conflict with another customer's deadline, they're not going to take your deadline seriously.
Yep.
The audio video company, you're just another one of the people. And that's not something that we do. Deadlines are incredibly important to us. That's one of the forefronts of our approach.
Yeah.
Is that if you say you're trying to get it done at a certain time, then we're going to get it at that time.
We deliver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost like in spite of the customer at times.
So yeah, definitely.
Yep.
The customer comes across delays, and we're constantly knocking on doors saying, hey, let's solve these delays because we want to hit your deadline.
Yep.
So, yeah.
A lot of our jobs are not just commercial jobs. Some of them are ultra high-end residential projects. And the interesting factor with that is that whether residential or commercial, the build out of a project takes time. It's not just simply the implementation that's that window of 6 weeks or 8 weeks of putting everything in. It's the lead up, it's the construction phase, it's being there for the drawings, it's having the project management meetings, it's all that. And those types of things tack away at the margins on the project. And that's again where you kind of absorb the idea that a company who hasn't, who's bidded it skinny, doesn't have the time to actually give you the attention to be there for that project management phase, for that engineering check, to make sure everything is done correct, to show up at the meetings. And that really suffers on the project for sure. So one of the questions I actually wanted to get more from Brett because of the technical side of it initially, not to say you're not technical, Kevin, but because Brett as the CTO really has a good insight, he's involved with the team on a regular basis. I want to understand a little bit from a technical perspective, how do people over-engineer conference room designs? Like what does that look like? Because I come across that affair often, especially when we see certain specs that have been put out by customers. When an IT team has designed something, I want to kind of open the table for that and talk about that. Over-engineering, what does that look like?
Yeah, sometimes over-engineering is as simple as not listening to the customer. Mm-hmm. Like, what does the customer actually need versus what does the audio-video geek think that they should have?
Sure.
Right? So that could be something as simple as they're just looking for a conference room system that's contained within one room, and the audio-video geek decides that they should be able to send that conference room system anywhere in the building.
Yeah.
Or, maybe they need, a simple signage solution that is, exploded out to being a massive content media server, or things like that. Things where you're not identifying what the customer needs up front. You're more interested in the cool factor.
Flexing your engineering muscle.
Exactly.
That's what I always say to people. It's like you got a guy who, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And you got a guy who wants to prove that he can program something better than somebody else, so he adds too many buttons on the panel that's just too complicated.
Yeah. What have you guys come across?
Oh, I think it's kind of helping them resolve issues between maybe their chief propeller head and their typical user, because I think sometimes we come in contact with their chief technology person who sometimes wants more than is practical, and would basically lead the end user community astray, because they're going to have features and functions and 3 deep menu options that no one will use. And so helping to resolve that for the customer, where we're using the top technologies, we're attentive to creature features that are important for their environment, but we help guide them on what's practical so they can use it and it's still simple and easy to use.
Yeah, that's kind of the key. Is there is an element to be said for future proofing and planning ahead, but there are limitations to that. If you have 2 displays, you're not going to put in an audio video switch that can support 8 displays. There's a certain point where you're just factually over engineering things.
So I think the over-engineering aspect of it happens on the side of the person who's doing the engineering, but it also sometimes happens on the side of the IT team or the customer. And that's something that I've come across a little bit as well, where I'll give you an example of that. The old school, as I would say, way of doing things, even in the past probably 5, 6, 7 years, would have been that in a conference room, you've got a separate computer in the room to operate the call. And so the typical scenario, you've got a keyboard and a mouse sitting on the conference table, and everybody who comes in has to then log into their user account to be able to share content, because they're sharing it from that shared computer. And it is definitely an interesting way of doing it, but that technology has changed a lot. And so you've got a guy who works in the IT team who has seen this technology implemented in the past, and then has this idea that that's what he needs to do going forward. And we run into those issues all the time where it's like, does that make sense? I mean, today the idea of having an appliance in the room that runs a Zoom call or a Teams call is so much more valuable, is so much more intuitive than to have to tell a user, go into that room, find the remote for the TV and turn it on, and then pick up the keyboard and mouse, log into your user account, click the share button once you've logged in. It just is so complicated. Another one I guess I kind of have ran into in the past would have been when somebody feels that they need to have too many displays in a room positioned across the room. So, we want in a video conferencing room to have everybody have a central point that they're looking at. They're interacting with a remote connection with people on the other side, and the cameras are usually positioned in the front of the room. So you want to have that intimate connection with people where you're looking at the TVs, they're looking back at you, and you get that eye contact. But unfortunately, I've had many of situations where the IT team wants to put displays on the side wall or the back wall along with the front wall. And so now you're taking the attention off of the remote connection, and the people who are sitting at the table are facing backwards. The camera is not getting a shot of their face. You've overcomplicated it, because in order for you to then get the right shot, you've got to have multi-camera.
Yeah, so you've increased the cost.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if I could be objective in this conversation, because I think I have 5 displays in my office. But
I do too.
But I think it depends. If it's a small conference room, yes, you're correct. They're overthinking it, and we're just trying to point them in the direction of 1 or 2 is the where you get the primary benefit. And then if they really want to push, putting it on the side is going to increase costs. It's going to increase engineering. We're happy to work with them on intelligent cameras tracking, which, as we know, multiple cameras, being able to auto-magically track the active speaker, so that can help in that sense. But sometimes users just really like to create those kind of immersive rooms, and they're okay with it, even though we tell them, put 1 or 2 up front, get everyone in that orientation. So yeah.
Yeah, that's where it comes back to listening to what the user needs.
Yeah.
I mean, we had that one, we did a large executive conference room, or it was actually a boardroom in New York City for a nonprofit organization. And it was just this meandering kind of labyrinth of rooms that were all connected, and they were insistent that it needed to be that room. And it had all these displays that also needed to be present because of how the board meetings would extend all the way down this table and around an area. And we were able to figure that out. And in that example, we were just kind of led by that particular room. But if a customer really wants us to kind of journey with them on some of these more, incredible non-standard things, we can help them. I think we'll just kind of point to them along the way. You should maybe consider these other ideas. And if they still want to go, then they've been educated.
Yeah.
What are some of the obvious areas on how multi-camera can really help with a customer at the end result?
A lot has developed with multi-camera recently, even to the point that there's new buzzwords such as inside out and outside in, which is to describe, for example, if we're thinking of Logitech Sight, which is kind of that cylindrical center camera, that would describe kind of like an inside out, multi-camera functionality. And then outside in would be things that use technology like Zoom's Intelligent Director to take multiple camera feeds and use AI in order to frame it. Or if you're coming from like a Microsoft Teams point of view, you might work in conjunction with QSC's Vision Suite, which used to be Sear Vision. And so there's a lot of ideas that have kind of been conjured up here in the somewhat recent past.
One Beyond.
One Beyond before that was kind of, Crestron's approach, which is now called, intelligent something or other. But so I think it's relevant for sure. It has to do with the meeting equity, and it's something that organizations, particularly those that have fleets of rooms, need to kind of work through, and we help them wrestle through it, because you might, for example, use an inside out type perspective, again, putting this camera system in the middle of the table for smaller room types, because then it could frame the four to maybe 6 people in a relevant kind of way. But then what do you do with these larger executive boardrooms? What do you do with these auditoriums, multi-purpose rooms? So what's been neat is for us to be able to help our customers understand the different meeting room technologies and what would be the appropriate technologies for each of those.
We're still in the infancy of video conferencing. If you think about it, it's only been a few years that it's come out, and the typical shot in the past was always that wide shot. The unfortunate thing is, part of making a system intuitive, inviting, reliable, which is our factor of trying to make sure that we do it right for customers, is that it is as automated as possible. One of the cool features that came out was, I think Zoom introduced the auto tracking feature, where auto framing feature, where it would auto frame the room based on how many people are. But you can't rely on the customer to sit in the right locations. And so if a customer comes into a room that's 30 feet long and somebody sits at the front of the room and somebody sits at the back of the room, well, now the camera is still going to be a wide shot. It's not going to frame appropriately in the room. I also think that we're getting into a place where the more intimate of an experience that we can create with video conferencing is where the future is, right? And I think we're just a skip ahead of being able to do something where it feels like you are literally standing in front of somebody, where you actually have some sort of a holographic video conferencing solution. And a couple years ago, there was a solution, I think, if I remember correctly, Polycom came out with it at one point, where there was a telepresence solution that had a camera sitting across the table, and it truly felt like you were sitting in front of it. It was a 3D sort of an effect. And we're getting closer and closer to that. And so I think multi-camera is the next step of that. I think it's going to be the hot thing in 2025, where everyone's going to do multi-camera. All the companies that are making what we call cookie cutter solutions are going to have multi-camera solutions. As Kevin mentioned, could be inside out or outside in, but it's going to be a combination of shots to get you even closer to that intimate experience where it feels like you're across the table from somebody you're interacting with.
Well, you can kind of picture that Zoom call or that Teams call that we've all been on, where you see a room full of people and you can kind of barely make out the faces that are around the table. They're just a little too small, and that's where multi-camera can come in, where you can get that tight shot on the person speaking and some of the other participants to see their reactions to statements that are made or conversations or what have you, without just having one big wide shot.
One of the questions I always get from customers is the typical, I want to do Zoom and Zooms, right? Unfortunately, we're at a place where both of those two companies compete with each other, like the Betamax VHS days, and they want to win the space. And some, as we know, are a little bit more accommodating at playing in the sandbox together, and others just frankly aren't. And so it's always a challenge. So how do we attack the challenge of doing Zoom and Teams? What are some of the options that we can do in that front?
I mean, you have to focus on what your primary infrastructure is. And sometimes that has to consider even what your primary customer's infrastructure is.
Yeah.
If you're going to be on calls constantly with a customer that's using one platform or another, you want to make sure that experience is as easy as possible. And you also want to make sure that you're picking a system that allows you to hop between them to some degree through interoperability to make that possible. A lot of the systems that are out nowadays support that interoperability. It wasn't like that even just a few years ago. Especially coming out of COVID, there was, different people choosing their different infrastructures, and the devices caught up though, and that interoperability is actually pretty simple nowadays. What you will miss out on in doing an interop solution tends to be specific features. If you're more of a Teams infrastructure company, you're going to have all the bells and whistles of Teams. But if you join a Zoom meeting, you're not going to have the bells and whistles that native Zoom's infrastructure people are going to get. And so you have to keep that in mind as well. That what are some of the use cases and some of the features that matter to your teams and your groups the most, and then choosing your infrastructure that supports that. And then obviously there's things like licensing costs. Different licensing costs are available to different types of organizations, and that's going to be a factor.
I think it's interesting you used the comparison of Betamax and VHS. Our kids wouldn't understand. They just hit a button and it downloads. But that's a good example because Betamax was the superior technology and VHS won out. And I think when you think about Zoom and Teams, it's been very, very much similar. Zoom has so many features. Really, its development roadmap has just been breakneck pace and no sign of slowing. But then you have Microsoft and the network effect of it being so large and everyone having it. It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. And for Microsoft, it's easy for it to just give additional license. If you're like an E4, E5 license, here, we just gave you Teams.
And they're very compelling Teams overall platform. So the Slack analog,
So then you got this idea where there's people that love Zoom. I would say, since we're involved so much with Zoom and Teams, we kind of live in that tension too. And I think for people on Teams, it's much easier to do interop. I think for Zoom, you can do, I think it does like a web RTC type session. You don't get the HDMI ingest when you're joining a Teams meeting. So that's a problem for people that want to be able to join into a Teams meeting and share content. So some of our enterprise customers that are standardized on Zoom, for example, are using solutions like PEXIP, and they're basically planning to meet somewhere. So okay, we have got this Teams meeting, so my Zoom room is going to meet in the PEXIP room that's on the invite and the Teams person, so then they can more naturally share content through that bridging software. Otherwise, you can also just have somebody join the Teams meeting within the room and share content. But these are the type of things that people are still going to have to wrestle through, as interoperability is not perfect, sometimes because of software and sometimes just because companies don't want to cooperate, because they want to drive their own technology forward.
Market advantage.
Yeah, I always look at it like the age-old answer that money kind of solves everything, right? Because at the end of the day, when I think about it, the problem really lies in these cookie cutter type solutions. If you want to keep your budget fairly controlled and you want to do one of the cookie cutter types of solutions, you kind of have to commit to a platform. If you have a no budget issue, we can put that solution in for you. We can put it in on the on the switching side, where we've got multiple appliances and we're doing all the switching on the back end. Or we can handle all of the technical camera switching and camera zooming and all of that stuff on the front end before we even send it to the video conferencing platform. So you're not relying on Zoom or Teams to handle all those extra features. So there's a number of different things that can be handled. There's a number of pre-engineered solutions that are out there today that we leverage every day, and they're wonderful solutions. And frankly, they make sense for most of the rooms that a customer has a need for. We've seen them all. We've seen the Logitech Rally Bar solutions, the Polycomp solutions that are the bars, the Yealing solutions. There's a number of options out there for it. But there's this challenge when you have this mid-size or larger room where you go into like needing a hybrid scenario, whether it's, hey, I need additional speakers on the ceiling, or something of that sort. And I want to talk about the challenges that we experience with that and why that is such a jump to kind of go into that semi-custom or custom solution. What's the value that those solutions bring that cause it to be a big jump?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at a 25 or 30 person table, a very large room for meeting's sake, thinking that you can handle all of that from a conference bar that's in the front of the room, that's not the way to go.
Yeah.
You don't want to throw audio at people. The people at the front of the room are now getting their ears blasted off just so the people at the back of the room can hear what's happening.
Yeah.
You've got a camera at the front of the room that's trying to, equalize everyone, capture the guy that's all the way at the back and capture the people that are, up front. And at a certain point, you have to acknowledge that additional speakers, so maybe the aging board person in the back of the room can hear a bit better. So adding speakers throughout the ceiling may be the right solution there, which obviously requires additional equipment, amplifiers, maybe some switching. Things like that, or adding table microphones, and in some cases adding aesthetically pleasing table microphones. A microphone that's a foot away from the person that's speaking will be a microphone that is across the room any day, always is going to be the case.
Yeah.
And so there are things that you have to consider when you start scaling up further and further and further, and then that comes back to camera switching and multi-camera technology. Some people want to make sure that the people at the table have equal opportunity to be seen and heard at the same time, instead of just a big wide shot where you're struggling to see who's that person that's speaking right now. And so those are factors that have to be considered, and with that comes costs. So you kind of have to make your choice. What is the right solution for my room, and what is my budget within inside of that? And we're pretty good at educating that and scaling that up and down within a reasonable solution that matches kind of the vision that you're going for, and helping you understand, like, hey, your budget's going to need to stretch a little bit here to get what you're picturing, but we're not going to give you something over-engineered. What have you guys come across?
Well, I can say one of the things that always comes up is that somebody figures, well, I can take this base solution, this pre-engineered solution, and I just want to add some additional speakers. Well, they forget the complicated technology that's behind that. These companies who make these types of solutions, they have done a lot of work to build in a custom DSP that's actually handling the complicated aspects of this. I mean, nobody wants to be on a call where you can't be heard. Nobody wants to be on a call where you're hearing feedback and you're hearing ringing, and those types of things matter. So I know Brett mentioned about, having the volume be really loud in the front of the room so that somebody hear at the back. That's going to come with issues as well, technical issues. It's going to come with ringing that's going to happen from feedback issues. And
yeah, just to jump in, just to clarify, for our listeners, a DSP would be kind of like the sound guy at the back of a concert.
Yep.
But that's all happening automatically via a black box. So instead of having a sound guy with this big, audio board, and he's adjusting levels and he's making sure that the EQ sounds right and all of those things, we have a black box that automatically can handle those things. And we put the programming and the time and effort into making that room shine.
Yeah.
So that, that's what you're talking about when you say, hey, there's a DSP that needs to be included in these types of systems.
Yep. Yeah, so the DSP that's built into these solutions is actually custom built for the pair of speakers and microphone that are actually a part of the package. So when we get involved in doing a semi-custom solution, you say, oh, it should be simple. Let me just add some additional speakers in the room. It's not as simple, because now we have to actually put in a separate DSP, and we've got to put in a separate microphone, and we've got to build that program. We've got to build the echo canceling. We've got to build, just like Brett mentioned, it's like a mixing board. It's not just a mixing board. It's a mixing board with a whole rack of effects that allow us to be able to make this sound really good. And so there's complicated processes involved in that.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes underestimated for what it all can do.
Yeah.
And it can scale to very large systems, but it's just as helpful in small systems. And like you said, that's something that people don't even realize is built into some of these conference bars, is that they have to build those features in. and we're the benefactors of technology as it's evolved. But as you scale up, sometimes you need those dedicated processors via a DSP to handle those situations.
Yeah. Something that that I regularly experience, because as you guys know, like, we include managed services agreement with every one of our proposals these days because it is such a necessary part of the process. And I want to, like, a lot of times it's hard to put words to that in a proposal when you send it across to somebody on email. But what value does that bring for us to do a managed services agreement? I want to first hear from Kevin on that one.
Well, having grown up in IT and, close to 25 years ago, I was in help desk, and just realizing how much things have developed. I look at what our customers were back then, and no offense to any of our IT directors, because we've got a lot of savvy IT directors that we work with that know their systems inside and out and are still very technical. But if I were to describe the landscape of most technical management and first line managers, there aren't as many people that know what to do anymore. It used to be people could, spin up their own MX servers, do their own Exchange servers in their facility. They might manage it themselves. And then progressively over the years, and in large part because of technology continuing to get more complex, the adoption has been towards, I need someone to take care of this, curate this, manage it as a service. So what used to be in yesteryears like maintenance and support is now called managed services. Mm-hmm. And it's this idea that I need someone who's my number one, who knows how to handle everything. And I think part of that is largely
who can respond fast.
Yeah, who can respond fast and knows the answer. And I think a lot of that is because of industry trends and just the difficulty and the daunting of trying to keep up with everything. And so for us, we explain to our customers that this is very much to your advantage, because with our managed services also comes our help desk, has the ability to do ticketing where you can, log a ticket and get a quick response, from us 24/7. During daytime support, we're closing out ticket responses in fewer than 3 hours and change. And just this idea that we can dispatch people on site and that we will be proactive in doing the preventative care to come on site, it just makes sense, because going back to that picture of just how the industry has changed, not many of our customers, even our very largest customers, don't have someone on site, making sure all the trains run on time. So they don't have someone that's like checking the rooms proactively. And so with us doing that, we accomplish a couple of things. One is we make sure that those rooms stay up and that they're utilized, and then we can just drive more enablement is the term we use, by making sure that we're available to answer questions and help fill in those gaps when the end users aren't particularly sure, so they don't hesitate to use the rooms because something's maybe not working or they don't understand how it's working. So there are a lot of reasons why it makes a lot of sense, and I think that's why we see many of our customers, putting managed services on their rooms and adding more rooms as they continue to grow with us, because there's real value there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you also don't often see IT teams or IT directors adding things like firmware updates to their to-do list. Audio video devices get installed and then they get forgotten about as long as they perform. Which means that bug fixes, or sometimes more importantly, feature releases, don't happen for customers who don't have managed services that are constantly coming out for the preventative maintenance and for the updates and to provide more features. That's not something IT teams, like I said, have on their to-do list and that they're worried about.
Yeah, if you think about how many times we get an update on this, right? I mean, how many times does Apple push out an update to our phone, or Android push an update to our phone? And that same thing in today's day and age applies to our video conferencing systems. New feature sets, bug fixes, maybe security fixes to make sure that we're not vulnerable, right? And those are super important to keep on top of. So,
yeah, releases on traditional older audio video equipment would be like once a year, every other year.
Yeah.
I mean, now you're getting releases every month.
Yeah, maybe even
from most of these devices.
Yeah.
And someone has to keep up with all of that.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, it's interesting when customers ask me how long is this system going to last, my response to them is, how well are you maintaining it, right? Because if you just throw a system in and you just try to set it and forget it, it's not going to last for long. It's going to crash on you after a period of time. And the thing you got to remember is that a lot of times our products are interfacing with other products. Maybe your Sony TV or your LG TV got an update pushed out to it that somehow broke a connection point. And so those types of things are super valuable for us to be able to keep on top of, to keep your system functioning at its best capabilities. Maybe the standard for content share has changed, and we now have a new HDCP standard or a new HDMI standard that now has to be recognized by the device. Well, fortunately, with companies that we're dealing with, they are constantly doing updates to push out so that we are ahead of those, those issues.
Yeah, and sometimes it's as simple as an HDMI cable.
Yeah.
A customer who specifically likes the ability to plug their HDMI cable into their laptop. So that way it's super easy for them to, share content to their screen. They don't have to think through anything else. Well, if that's happening every day, constantly, and that cable's getting worn down, we would rather us find that out and us replace that cable before the boss finds that out and the boss doesn't have a working system.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's nothing worse than having your board meeting that's been scheduled for the past 60 days and you show up into the room the morning of and it doesn't work, right? And so what I find is that with the managed services agreement, we are able to resolve probably somewhere in the area of 95 to 98% of the problems remotely. The typical adage, the typical answer that most of the IT directors would give you would be, did you try to reboot it, right? And many times that is the solution. And so we are, knowledgeable on what devices need to be rebooted, what devices are actually going to take your system down. We've got everything set up so that we can manage that remotely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can often push firmware updates remotely. We can keep track of the status of things. It kind of depends on which devices are used, but that's an option. Those are things that we can do.
Well, we're done. All right, cool. Let's take a job.